Welcome to the session. I'm Rachel Blackburn. I'm on the corporate operations team at Oracle, and I'll be moderating the webinar. This webinar is part of the weekly Oracle at Oracle webinar series, where we have the opportunity to hear from the executive team that reimagined Oracle. In this series of webinars, we share insights from our own journey to the cloud and demonstrate how we're using Oracle Cloud to power our business and enable exceptional customer and employee experiences, and share our learnings along the way so others can do the same. We're going to dive into today's topic. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll hear how Oracle is leveraging quarterly updates to outpace change. Now I'll hand it over to Kritika Bhatt, who will be your presenter today, to introduce herself and share a little bit about what she does at Oracle.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Kritika, and I'm the Group Vice President in an organization within Oracle called Oracle Applications Labs, also known as OAL. And we are basically the applications IT group that implements and runs the systems for internal use. So basically, my customers are Oracle's internal business groups. Now, I do want to point out that our organization is part of the larger product development division. And this is particularly important because what we make sure we do is to have a very tight feedback loop with our product groups. We're continuously sharing our experiences both with the product as well as with the operations aspect. And this is the way we drive continuous improvements into the product, and customers benefit from that. Now, within the organization, I have responsibility for the ERP, the HCM, and the EPM applications. I'll just let you take a quick look at the safe harbor statement. Now, I do want to make it clear that what I'm sharing with you is how internally we are running the quarterly updates, our best practices, and the lessons learned. So this is really not about product features or a specific way we operate, though I might touch upon some of these. So I'd like to start by sharing a little bit about our cloud implementation at Oracle, so you have some context for the discussion. Now, we run a single instance, what I call the global single instance pod in the cloud. We run in the public cloud just like our customers do. And just so you get an idea of the scope and the scale, I want to share some numbers. Oracle does business in 175 countries, and we contract in about 122 countries. Today, we are running HCM, financials, sales, supply chain management, supply chain planning, all in the single instance of the cloud pod. So basically, we use the financials to close our business, 40 billion revenue. We partner with 430,000 customers, interact with 40,000 suppliers. Self-service modules like HCM and expenses and procurement are used by 138,000 employees. Some transactional volumes, 22,000 new hires in a year. We do about 45 to 50,000 HCM transactions in a month. We do 30,000 employee expenses a week, which is about $1.5 million if you see in a year. So these are some of the volumes we deal with, and the cloud platform is what we use to do our M&As and absorb the companies we acquire. We are typically averaging about 10 to 12 per year right now. So hopefully this gives you an idea of our implementation. And really what this means is we are running a global multinational like Oracle, which has subscription service business, software, hardware, consulting, and education in the cloud. Now, in today's world, which is service oriented, most organizations need to make sure that they can use innovation to meet the challenging and changing market conditions and be able to satisfy the customer needs, because customer expectations are very high. I have a recent example to share. We're all in this unprecedented times with the COVID situation, and couple months ago, our HCM business came to us and said, hey, with the current situation, we need to be able to track health incidents so that we can action them appropriately. And in less than 2 weeks, my HCM team was able to implement and start running an HCM module that we have in SaaS, which is called Workforce Health and Safety, in less than 2 weeks. And our HCM business now uses it to track employee incidents, log any actions, and track them to completion. And something like this would have been unheard of in the on-premise world, to have this up and running in less than 2 weeks. What I'd like to do is I want to rewind a little bit and tell you about a couple of transformations that we did before we moved into the world of cloud. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, we did this huge initiative, which was very popularly known in the industry as the global single instance. You've probably heard of the $1 to $2 billion savings that Oracle had. Now, this global single instance initiative was in the world of on-premise. We were running 70 ERP instances, and as part of this initiative, IT consolidated the 70 ERP instances into one. At the same time, our business partners centralized all their operations into shared service centers and globalized all the processes. So this global platform worked great for us when Oracle was having this, starting with PeopleSoft in the mid 2000s, doing the growth by acquisition. It was a great platform because we were running global processes, a single platform. We were able to absorb all these companies in. So that was when we were primarily in the license business, right? So worked great for us. But then if you fast forward, 2009, 2010, we were moving from being a license business to a complete, subscription services provider. And at that point, what we found was we really needed a game changer, because the on-premise global platform that I talked about, EBS, was highly customized. You will be able to customize on-premise applications, and most customers will. So what we found was when we were getting EBS upgrades every few years, it became a huge undertaking for us to do the upgrades, simply because you had customs and they broke and you had to fix all of them. And the upgrades were large and massive amounts of testing. So upgrades became a Herculean task, as a result of which we started to say, hey, we're not going to do the upgrade unless we really need it. So we were going for many years without getting the new features that these upgrades were giving us. And as we were moving into the service-oriented world, we found that customer expectations, employee expectations were very high. The need of the day was agility and flexibility, the immediate need to be able to handle the changing business models. And that's where cloud has been a game changer for us. Now, if you compare what I just talked about with the on-premise systems of cloud, in cloud, the SaaS applications, you're really not doing anything invasive to customize it for your needs. There's many ways you can configure SaaS application to your needs. You have the standard setups available to you. You have apps composers, page composers, extracts, uploads, BIP, OTBI, Groovy scripting. So and where you have proprietary needs, you can use the PaaS, platform as a service, and build your proprietary need and have it talk to SaaS through web services. So you can configure SaaS to your needs, but you don't do anything invasive. So as a result, when you get the quarterly updates from product, you are able to uptake them without any difficulty, because you don't have to worry about things breaking. And as you take these updates every quarter, what it means is product is releasing fixes and new innovations, and you have them in your environment almost immediately. So you have access to the innovation that you didn't in the world of on-premise. And this is the way we found that this has been a complete game changer for us. We've gone from being more transactional to focusing on the entire experience, from being reactive to being more proactive. And from a product perspective, what this means is because customers are uptaking these updates and the features within 2-3 months of the product groups releasing them, and they're using these features, our product development groups are having a much better feedback loop with customers. Now I'd like to, get into some of the details of the updates and share some practices with respect to how you uptake them as a customer. Now, we have 4 quarterly updates that we release. They are available to new customers in February, May, August, and November, and you're probably familiar with the naming convention. They're named as 20A, 20B, 20C, 20D. The 20 is indicative of the year, the calendar year, and A, B, C, D are indicative of the quarter in which they are released. Now, the release is available to existing SaaS customers starting February, May, August, and November. But just keep in mind, for new customers that just signed up with Oracle and are doing the implementations, they have access to these updates a month earlier. Now, these quarterly updates bring in maintenance updates, bug fixes, security improvements, performance improvements, and new features and innovation. You can decide which month you need to uptake the release, but you cannot skip the releases. It is mandatory. You have to update every quarter. And once you decide which month of the quarter you're taking the updates, you will get the update in your test instances the first Friday, and you will get it in your production instances the third Friday. And typically the outages start at 7 p.m. Pacific. I say typically because I know there are some variations. For example, in the Middle East, I believe it's Thursday. And I'm sharing some of these details, but all of these are available to you on the Customer Connect and Oracle websites. Now, you get these quarterly updates, but you're probably thinking, hey, what if I have a fix and I can't wait a whole quarter to get the fix? Well, no problem. You also have optional updates. We have weekly bundles and we have monthly bundles. Now, the weekly bundles are cumulative and they roll up to the monthly bundle. The monthly bundles are also cumulative and roll up to the quarterly uptake. Now, in these, you largely get maintenance updates, which is bug fixes and things like that. Now, if you choose to take the monthly updates, the cadence is very similar. The first Friday on test and the third Friday on production, 7 p.m. Pacific. And I think you have to opt into these monthly bundles in using the admin console, and you can decide when you want to eventually stop them. If you are taking a weekly bundle because there's a fix that you need, then the weekly bundle will come in on the Friday in test, and the following week it will come into production. We also have what we call exception updates. If you have a really, really critical fix that you need, there is an exception process that you can follow to get an emergency one-off. But when you're getting these optional updates, there is something you need to keep in mind. Now, most of you, like Oracle, will have a few test instances. Internally, what we have is we have a couple of instances we use as a path to production. And because we do business improvement projects every quarter, we also have a build test and UAT for these projects. Now, we like to refresh these instances every so often, so we have access to the latest data and the setup. Now, you need to keep in mind that the target and the source environments need to be at exactly the same patch level. So if you're going to take an emergency update or a monthly update, you need to make sure that you don't schedule the refreshes in between those two, because then you have a level mismatch. CloudOps also has some restrictions on when you can schedule these. We don't schedule these too close to a quarterly update. And also, I believe they need 3 or 4 weeks advance notice to schedule the refreshes. What we do at Oracle is we have a calendar for a whole year, so there are no surprises. For a whole year, we know when we are going to refresh, and our business partners also know what the schedule is. And then the last thing is, if you have PII data that you want to scramble in your test instances, and we do that, there are data masking templates that are available that you can request be run. And I've referred to the quarterly updates. For those of you who run payroll, you also get some additional payroll legislative updates. And you also get monthly Vertex file updates for US and Canada tax. And we also have the infrastructure updates, the middleware and the OTBI, and typically those also come in quarterly. So this gives you an idea of the kinds of updates we have, the mandatory quarterly and then the optional ones. Let's look at a little bit of the timeline. Now, I've talked about the 4 releases available to existing customers in February, May, August, and November, and a month earlier for new customers. Now, 4 weeks prior to that release, so let's use 20B, which is currently available for update. Let's use that as an example. So 20B was available for new customers in April, and existing customers can opt to take it in May, June, or July. In March, it was 4 weeks prior to the release. for new customers and 8 weeks really for existing customers, the readiness document was available. The readiness document is available on the Oracle readiness website. You can also get to it through Customer Connect. And that document is available 4 weeks prior to the release. And then incrementally leading up to the release, a lot more documentation becomes available for specific features, a lot more information, videos and PowerPoints that you can use to understand the features are all made available. So that's the timing of the documentation itself for the release. And then first Friday of the month that you've elected to update, you get the updates and test. You have 2 weeks of testing. On the third Friday, you get the update in production. You do get bug fixes with these updates, and you also get new features. Typically, new features are disabled and you have to opt into them. So you can look at the documents and then release, decide what you're going to do for that particular update. And you really should, look at all the documentation because there's a wealth of information on the readiness website. Now, I want to share, some best practices that we follow at Oracle. We have been doing these quarterly updates for a while. So in the early days, we made some mistakes and then we fine-tuned it. And now, we have a lot of discipline. You'll hear me say discipline and cadence a lot on this slide. We have a good discipline that we follow that I want to share with you. The first one really revolves around the release documentation that I've just mentioned. Now at Oracle, right from the late 90s when we did that global single instance EBS project, we've had a very, very sophisticated engagement model between the business and IT. So on the business side, we have these roles that we call the Global Process Owner, or GPOs. That's the acronym. The GPOs are very influential leaders who can drive change and in fact even mandate change when needed for their process area. And examples of process areas are order to cash, expense to pay, record to report. So we have, that role. And then the matching role on the IT side is one of the global solution owner. These are, again, senior IT leaders who understand the technology, the applications, and the solutions, and how these can be applied to the business processes. So before every release, as soon as the documentation becomes available, the GPO teams and the GSO teams meet. We meet by process area and review all the documentation that is available. And we try to understand, which are the issues we were waiting on that are getting fixed in this release. We look at what new features are coming in, understand what those features entail, look at what the opt-in expirations are. And I'll tell you what I mean by opt-in expiration. I mentioned to you that when these updates come in, you get new features and they are not enabled. You have to make the conscious choice to enable them. You have to opt into the feature using the application console. For a few quarters, these will be opt-in features, but at some point, product development will say, hey, the feature now is no longer opt-in, it's mandatory. So our business partners in IT will look at all this documentation so they understand, what is part of the release, what is expiring. Now, the next best practice I want to talk about is tracking of the features. You're getting a lot of these features every quarter, and you're probably taking some of them and you haven't taken others. You want to make sure that you have a good cadence and you understand where you are in the implementation cycle for these features so you don't get overwhelmed later with too many of them expiring and you not be ready to uptake those features. And lastly, some best practices around regression tests. We do both end-to-end and silo regression tests. And it's important to identify what are the key flows you want to test. When you have just 2 weeks to test, you can't be scrambling at the last minute deciding what you do. So you really should have a checklist of what you want to do that you follow for each of these quarterly updates. So the thinking is already done, so you can just be executing in the 2 weeks. Know what you want to test. If you want to test a close, have you made sure that the previous period is closed? If there's a particular thing you want to test, have you staged the data? Just make sure you have, all that nailed down, and then you can execute to this every quarter. Now, I want to drill down into each of these. Now, what I'm going to show you over this, the next 5 or 6 slides is just screenshots from our readiness website. This is fairly recent because I just took these screenshots earlier in the week. And I would strongly encourage you, if you're not already familiar, to be very, very familiar with the Oracle readiness websites, which you can also get through from Customer Connect. So, when you're wanting to, 4 to 8 weeks before the release, when you want to look at the documentation, you can start over here. Now, let's say in my case, I want to look at enterprise resource planning. I click over there. And I can see all the modules. I see financials, revenue management, project management, and I've decided I want to look at the financials. Now, if I scroll down on this page, you will also see there are links to known issues, which will take you into Moz documents. So let's say I decide I want to look at financials and I click on the HTML link. It's going to show me all the releases. And in this case, I want to go and look at the release features for 20B. As you can see, it was updated last on 24th April. So I'm going to click in there. And then you can see now that you have the features by module. I can go and look at advanced collections or expenses or general ledger. If you click on that, it'll take you to that section. And you will notice I had mentioned to you that the documentation starts to arrive 8 weeks before the release. So you can see here the documentation was first created in 6th March. And then subsequently, they keep adding additional details. If I scroll down on this page, this is what I see. And here you will see the reference I made to opt-in features, right? So features largely come in disabled, as you can see here, features delivered disabled. And then you can look at the documentation for the feature. And if you want to take it for that particular update, you can choose to opt into it. Now, after a few quarters, features will start to have the opt-in expiring. And that's when you will see that they show up as features delivered enabled. And you will have further details. It will tell you if the feature that is delivered enabled is a report, is it a small scale UI change, or is it a larger UI change? And this helps you with your planning. The documentation will also tell you for a particular feature, whether it can just be used as is, or if you need to do anything to enable that feature, if there's any configuration or anything that needs to be done. So you can see over here, it's telling you that particular features, they're delivered ready to use, or yes, customer action is needed. And you can also see the opt-in expiration details on these pages. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about feature tracking. I mentioned how it is really important to keep track of the features you're getting. So at Oracle, the best practice we follow is to track it in 4 buckets. Now, this is some sample data that you're seeing that I've just shared here to illustrate the point. So we track the feature by release. The release can be 18C, 19A, 20B, whatever it is, by release, and by pillar. And within the pillar, then we drill down into the applications. So we keep track of the features in 4 buckets. Bucket 1 is, hey, I've not yet reviewed this. It's what you see in yellow. I'm yet to review the feature. Bucket 2 is features that we have already reviewed and we have deemed that they are not applicable to our particular business. Then the third status is roadmap candidates, features that we have reviewed and we have decided that we're not taking it this quarter, but we are probably going to take it in a subsequent quarter. And when we make the decision on when to take the feature, we have also factored in the opt-in dates, because you really want to make sure that you don't cut this down to the wire. If something is expiring in December, you want to make sure from a best practice perspective that you opt into that feature at least 3 months in advance, so you have sufficient time to do all the work that's required. And then, of course, the 4th feature is implemented. So we keep a close watch on this to make sure that we don't let this get away from us. We don't have too much of a backlog of features that we have not reviewed. And then what you see here is just a pie chart, which tells me for a particular release, what are the features I've uptaken by domain. And we use a simple Apex page to keep track of it, but you can decide what works for you, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or a small application. But I would strongly encourage you to keep track of the features. And then lastly, a little bit more on testing best practices. Now, I talked about how we'd learned some of these along the way. When we first started these updates, we still had the on-premise large upgrade mindset. And so we started to test way too much. And there was a lot of redundancies between IT and business duplicating efforts. And then we course corrected, and we have agreed on a responsibility split between IT and the business. What IT does is we test the end-to-end flows, and business focuses on some silo testing based on what they deem important. And they also focus most of their time on new feature testing. It's pretty important that you maintain a repository of all your test scripts and your test plans. We maintain everything in Zephyr. And it's not enough if you just create this one time and forget about it, because you'll find that it very quickly gets out of date. We review this repository every quarter, because when you take on new features and you want to make sure for subsequent quarters, you have factored in regression testing for these features. Also, if you find that you miss something in a update and you hit bugs, subsequently you update your test scripts so you don't miss that. And I have an interesting one. And during the early days, we had a miss where for our self-service transactions, we tested everything with only new transactions. We didn't test it with in-transit transactions. And we found that we hit a bug. So now we have updated all our self-service module test scripts to make sure that we test them both with new transactions and transactions which are in transit. From a regression testing perspective, try to automate. I'll be the first to tell you we're not quite there. We have, I think, at this point, automated about 30% of our tests, but we do plan to automate a lot more. So try to automate the regression tests. And then you'll find that product has pretty good QA, so you don't necessarily need to test the simple flows. If you have any variation of flows, those are what you need to test. And if you're in a coexistence model with your on-premise systems, make sure you test the integrations. If you have any outbound interfaces, you might also want to do a quick test of that. And lastly, when we do new feature testing, what we make sure is it's not just the feature that we're testing, not just the functionality and performance, but also the complete experience. Because again, we had a few misses when we had first done our financial implementation. We found that our expense module, we had done the testing, but focused more on functionality and not given our end users, our employees, the best possible experience. We focused a bit too much on the back office experience and less on the front office. So now going forward, when we test our features, especially if they're impacting a significant employee base or a customer base, we make sure it's not just about functions and features, but about the experience itself. So now that I've shared the best practices, I want to talk a little bit about how we decide which features to uptake. We work very closely with our business teams to make the decision on which features to uptake, because this is all about improving your business. So using the documentation that I've just shared with you, we analyze the inventory of features. We don't have too many cases where the features are being enabled there, because we probably already got ahead of it. Bug fixes, of course, come in automatically. I won't talk about that. But for the features, we look at, is a feature a quick win, or is it a transformative and a larger feature, right? So if you have quick wins, and my definition of quick win is something that is easy to test. IT doesn't have to do any work. They just have to opt in. There's no configuration, nothing that needs to be done from the IT side, and nothing much from the business perspective for change management. That is my definition of a quick win. We try to take all the quick wins as soon as possible, probably even with the update itself, because they're the low-hanging fruit. Then for the larger transformative changes, there are two things we keep in mind. We look at, hey, this is pretty transformational. How much work is it, both from an IT configuration perspective and for the business to communicate to the end users and manage change? And based on that, we will decide when to take that transformative change. And this will form the body of work from new features, the quick wins and the transformative changes that we will then scope for the quarter's update and then test and go live with. And that's how we make the decision. I am going to share a few examples with you. I wouldn't bother to focus too much on the functionality per se, but more the thinking in taking these features. And I do want to point out at this stage that now that we have this streamlined process for managing our updates, we're finding the last several quarters, we have managed to take 100 plus new features. For 20A that we went live with on March 20th, we had 116 new features we enabled. 20B, we will be taking in June 20th, and I don't yet have the details of how many features we're taking. And this might be a good point to tell you that at Oracle, we take our new updates, the quarterly updates in March, June, September, and December. And the reason we went with these months are because this is the first month of our quarter. So we close the quarter, and then a week later, we've taken the new updates. The timing is right for us. So when you decide, that's what you're going to have to look at. What's the right timing from your close perspective and from any other business considerations that you have. But back to examples of new features, I want to share 4 examples. Some of these are already live and some we are considering going live with very shortly. My first example was what I would consider a transformative change. With, I believe, the 18B release, we got this new feature called the HCM Newsfeed UI. And this was fairly transformative. It gave us a responsive UI, which means that you could use the UI on all devices without having to bother about mobile applications. It also gave our users a very newsfeed-like UI that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, a vertical UI to complete your transaction. And there were a lot of good features we got. We had the tiles for quick actions. We had quick actions that you could directly go into. And so we wanted to make sure that we had handled the change management, because for our complete employee population, as you saw, we have 138,000 employees who use HCM. We wanted to make sure they were aware of the changes coming, that the business had time to manage that change. And we also wanted to make sure from an IT perspective that we had configured the UI for the best possible experience. And that's why we took this feature a quarter after it was delivered. Then I had some examples of quick wins. We have all these notifications that managers get for self-service transactions, whether it's procurement or expenses or HCM. And we were rather keen to customize these notifications, brand them for our own internal use the way we wanted to be. So we wanted that flexibility. So as soon as these products released VIP notifications, we took these so we could have a very consistent and flexible feel to our notifications. Then I want to talk about a couple of what I consider the innovations that the quarterly updates have delivered to us. A good example is the adaptive intelligent apps. They release at the same time as the rest of the financials. And a good example is intelligent payment discounts. This was released a while ago, and we're looking at uptaking it shortly. And this one, again, transformative. It's using artificial intelligence to give you some efficiencies and improve your payables process. You've got the first party supplier data in your SaaS pod. This first data is really, your suppliers, the transactions you've done with them, the payments. Then what the product gives you is using Datafox. There's enriched supplier data, additional company data for the supplier that is available. And then the AI app blends the first party and the third party data and gives you more insights into your supplier. And then the intelligent payment feature is basically telling you that if you offer these particular suppliers early payments, they will give you better discounts. So this is really going to streamline the payables process for us and give us efficiencies. And so we're looking at uptaking this. But there's a good example of innovation that you're getting with these quarterly updates that you can use to transform your processes. And then the last one I want to talk about is Expense Bot. That one is general availability with 20B. So if you go into the expenses 20B readiness doc, you will see this feature in the documentation. Now, this feature was released in restricted mode a little earlier, and we had looked at it, and we have already piloted it for about 5,000 US users. And later this year, we will globalize this to all our expense users. But this is basically, the bot is a conversational agent, and it is extending your traditional expense web app beyond the desktop. You can now use your phone to create your expense item. So let's say, I've taken a team member out for lunch and I have a receipt and I'm going to claim it as a business expense. I don't need to log into the application and create this expense item. I can just take out my phone, take a picture, and text that expense into a phone number. Now, using a combination of OCR, optical character recognition, and machine learning, the receipt is read, attributes are derived, and I get a confirmation message saying, Kritika, would you like to create this expense report, this date, this type, and this amount? And if I say yes, pretty much, the expense item gets created in the database just as it would have if I had logged into the application and done it. So I mentioned to you that we do 1.5 million expenses in a year. So if you look at even a fraction of these being touchless, it's a huge productivity savings for us. So these examples, I'm trying to highlight to you how you can continuously improve your process. I'll take expenses, right? As I mentioned to you, when we first went live, we hadn't done the best optimization from an end user perspective, but we have really used the quarterly updates the last few years. We've every update we look at what's coming. In fact, I can tell you with 20B, you've got the bot, you've got now a quick actions. There's a carousel of cards, and those cards will directly take you into actions that you have for your expenses. So we're continuously looking at what features are available. If they're quick wins, let's uptake them right away. If they are not quick wins, this little configuration, maybe a quarter later, but we are continuously looking at the expense to pay process. And over the last couple of years, we have transformed the experience. And this is how you can, use these features. And that's what I wanted you to really take away from this slide, was not the features per se that I'm sharing, but the thinking. So now, if you see in summary, right, we have 4 steps to managing our updates. The first is really the analysis phase, where IT and the business teams are evaluating all the features that are available, prioritizing them, looking at the quick wins, what's really transformative, and then planning that particular update, right? So make the plan and execute that for go live. And we're looking at obviously improving the user experience. We're looking at, hey, there's a transformative change coming. What communications do we need to do with our businesses? There might be work involved for the business teams. If we have, for example, training videos for a feature, and if we've updated that feature, we make sure that the videos are changed. So that kind of work is planned and executed. Then, of course, there's the testing stage where the joint teams are conducting the regression and user acceptance testing for both the bug fixes. For bug fixes, we know the specific bug fixes we're getting with the update, and we will just test those. And then obviously test the new features. And then we prepare for go live, right? There are certain things we need to do for go live. When the system goes down, we might have interfaces to other instances, be it on-premise or other cloud instances. We will shut down the interfaces. When the update's finished, we will restart those interfaces. We will have support experts standing by to answer questions. And this is the 4-step plan, but the 5th one that I want to highlight is our businesses are very good. Let's say we had features that we took that were supposed to transform a process. We have some KPIs, and we're continuously tracking to make sure that we are achieving our goals, because the learnings are very important. So that's the process we have that we're executing every quarter. And as we learn, we continuously tweak this, right? So we learn every quarter and do better the next. So if you look, what we really have in the cloud is a balanced approach. You have stability, improvements, and innovation. And the infrastructure updates that you get, the bug fixes, the security, the improvement, all of those contribute to keeping your systems stable after your initial go live. And then at Oracle, we are constantly looking to simplify our process. We've already got centralized and standardized processes, but we're constantly wanting to simplify. So an example is, perhaps we are using a workaround for a particular business process, but if we get a feature that enables us to get rid of that workaround, we will take that opportunity. We might have an extension that we built, but if we get a feature that, gives us the same functionality, we will immediately get rid of the extension. So we're constantly looking for ways to simplify the process. And of course, the third component is innovation. Everyone wants to use machine learning. Everyone wants to use AI, but it's not just about the technology. It's how can I use the technology to improve and streamline my business process? And that's what we always, are keeping a watch for when we get these new updates. So, this is the way, IT and our business partners collaborate for success. It is very, very important that, we share a common vision, and then we have a strategy and a roadmap that we execute to jointly. We use the quarterly updates as a vehicle to get the features, the innovation that will help us streamline our business processes. And we're looking to make continuous improvements to the user experience, be it customers or employees. It's all about streamlining the experience, automating where you can, empowering the users, and then eventually delighting them. And then the change management aspect is important. And you have to be conscious of what you communicate. You don't want to overly, communicate too much, because then people stop paying attention. So we make sure that when we have the big features, we get ahead of it. We communicate. Expense bot's a great example. People are very, very excited about it. So we've made sure that we've publicized that feature. But if there's something smaller like a VIP notification, we really don't need to publicize that, because when people get the first email, they're immediately going to notice that, hey, the notifications changed, it's Oracle branded, it looks much better. So it is a balance on the communications and the change management aspect. And what we've learned along the way is really these, the quarterly updates are an agility tool for us. I've shared with you how in 2 weeks we were able to go live with a module in SaaS. What we tell our business and what our business users are really good about is when we're implementing something new, you don't have to hold out for the complete solution like you did in on-premise, because in on-premise, you did it once and you walked away from it, and the users wanted everything at that first shot. But with the quarterly updates, what you need to do is make sure that all your business critical requirements are met, and then all the bells and whistles can come continuously, because you're never done. You continuously look to streamline your experience. And as you can see, we have ruthlessly simplified our update process. Keep it simple so that you can execute and be successful every quarter. And never forget that it's not about the features, it's not about the functionality, but it's about the overall experience. So always, whatever you do with the quarterly updates, you have to keep the end user in mind. So those were the slides I had planned to share for today. So at this point, I would like to open it up for questions, and Rachel will help us with that. But I'm going to be joined by a colleague from Oracle Applications Lab in the Q&A portion of the discussion. So I would like him to introduce himself. Mike, over to you.
Hello, yes. My name is Mike Moran. I work in Kritika's organization in OAL, and one of my responsibilities is as the program manager for our migration to the cloud. So my team is supporting many of these quarterly updates, as well as our project implementations in our move to the cloud.
Thanks, Mike. And Rachel, over to you for questions.
Great. Thank you, Kritika, and thanks for being on, Mike. We do have quite a few questions, so we're going to try to answer as many as we can in the last couple of minutes. First question, Kritika. How do you know what bug fixes are included in each update?
Sure, and I'll share I'll share my perspective on it, and then Mike, please add yours, because as Mike mentioned, he's has the PMO office and they're constantly managing these updates. I'd like Mike's perspective too. So what we do is we don't try to get a complete bug manifest for an update and try to test all of that, because really our regression tests are intended to make sure that our systems work as they are expected to with a particular update. But what we do is, if we have a particular issue in a process area, let's say, in a supply chain management area, we have a particular issue, we track that bug so that we know when the fix is coming. And the IT team and the business teams will specifically test just that bug. And that's how we manage it. It's a combination of targeted testing for the particular bug in question that we're interested in. And then overall, to manage the change aspect, just do end-to-end testing so we can ensure that we've done the regression testing completely.
Yeah, Kritika, that covers it. And obviously we keep an eye on the known issues document as well.
Oh, good point, Mike.
Yeah.
And I believe you can get through to the known issues document from the readiness website.
Great. Next question. Kritika, in your opinion, what are the benefits of having Oracle's IT resources involved in the quarterly updates in collaboration with the business teams?
Yeah, it's what I mentioned, Rachel, where at one point we found that there was too much testing going on. We have 2 weeks. We want to be efficient. So what having both IT and business test is each of the teams can target a particular area, and that way we're very efficient. Now we really want our business teams to be able to focus on the new features, right? Because as I've explained the past 30 minutes, we've got those new features, which many of them transform the business process. And we'd like our business users to focus on that from a testing perspective. So the benefits IT brings is, we've got the system is working as it's supposed to. We've got that angle covered. So, we'll make sure that we execute the regression test to make sure everything works with the new update. If we have particular technical integrations with third parties or with another cloud system, we'll test that. But this ensures that there's a good responsibility balance and the business can focus on the new features.
Great. And any issues, if you have any, with cloud instances not updating at the same time?
Oh, that's a good one. Not really. We do run CPQ cloud and we have EPM cloud and GTM. Now, some of these update at the same time, but I know that EPM products, they do release updates once a month. And CPQ, we do plan to get it updated at the same time as our main cloud pod, but it doesn't right now. But we have not had any issues with these pods that update at different times. As I've mentioned, there are some steps you need to do for pods being taken down for an update. You might stop the interfaces and restart them, but we've not seen any issues with timings between the pods. Mike, would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, Kritika. Yeah, I mean, certainly with our footprint at the moment, we're most tightly configured with between ERP with GTM, and we keep those updates in sync.
Great. And there have been a lot of questions around regression testing and advice on that. So for businesses who have challenges pushing updates every quarter, what are your recommendations around solutions when it comes to regression testing?
Yeah, it's important that, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think you need to focus so much on the typical flows, right? Because, when our products are released, there are, good QA practices where the end-to-end flows are tested. So I would say, if you've got variations in the flows, that's definitely something that you want to focus on. Don't focus on the run-of-the-mill flows. Focus on the variations. If you've got certain flows where there's a large amount of revenue flowing through, focus on that. So use your time wisely and don't try to, in fact, we learned this in our early updates. We were testing too much, and then we started looking at, are we finding any issues? And we realized, we're not finding the issues. So that's when we decided that we're probably overthinking this, and let's focus on these specific, things like integrations, outbound interfaces, certain functions that we think are very, very critical to our business. That's what I would recommend you focus on. Mike, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think when we were, back on sort of on-premise days, I think often IT's approach was, we would test the solution, and then when we thought it was, ready, we would hand it over to the business to test, and very often just performing the same test. So we've really got rid of that now. We just test once, and we also look closely at the tests that we are doing. So, to make sure that those are still valid, they kind of represent the key flows. If there is a need to add something, we look at whether we can remove anything. And then, of course, with new features, for the most part, those are kind of opt-in, require some opt-in or implementation step in order to uptake. So it's really, I think, it's very much in the customer's control as to how much you want to uptake with that as well, which means, you can really just reduce your testing just to focus really just on those core regressions.
Great. And there have been some questions relating to the automation of regression testing. Can you elaborate a little bit on how we're working to do that?
Yeah, I can start, and then probably Mike can add some color to it. As I mentioned, I think at this point, we have about 30% of our regression tests automated. Within our IT structure, we do have a QA team, and they were looking to do the automation. We have used Selenium. And the thinking really is, after they automated the first few, they're thinking of giving us an infrastructure then which all the functional IT teams can use to build out the rest of the automation. Mike?
Yeah, and there is a framework for being able to automate regression testing. I think it was released with, I don't know, I can't remember, 19A, 19D or 20A. There is a support note out there as well on how to go about this.
Great. And so back to the idea of collaborating with the business, what challenges do we face when dealing with the business in terms of scheduling or accepting changes or enhancements?
Yeah, I think, we are particularly lucky at Oracle in that I mentioned the engagement model that we had, the GPO, GSO engagement model that was put in place, for our e-business world. So because of that, I think the engagement model we have, the fact that our businesses are very tuned into, hey, it's all about the experience and we need to continuously streamline the process. And we have those leaders who can drive change. I would say that it's very collaborative. Probably the thinking, our business users are far ahead in the thinking. So we don't very often have to, drag folks along saying we need to make the change. So it really becomes more a question of a discussion of what are the priority areas. For example, we have several initiatives: accelerated buying experience, accelerated hiring experience, accelerated expense experience. And it's really a question of, deciding on the processes that we want to focus on and prioritizing it. So I wouldn't really say it's a challenge as in, we don't have the collaboration. It's very collaborative. That engagement model is holding us in very good stead. And it's really down to prioritizing and deciding how much change we want to absorb each quarter. So what we typically do is, we line of sight into the features that have been released in the, past 2 quarters, what's coming in the next quarter. We are able to decide that, hey, for the expense flow, these are the features we want to take, and this is how we are going to do it, and kind of have a few changes coming in by quarter. That's how we prioritize it. So I would say, at Oracle, it's kind of in a fine art form for us, and it's working really well. And the secret sauce for the success is that engagement model. So, if I've got folks who are listening in who are either from IT or the business and they don't have that kind of engagement model, I would strongly recommend they have that, because that really helps this process, the collaboration, right? It's I think our secret sauce for our success.
Great, and I think we have time for one more question. So this relates to feedback. Are you finding that users are more satisfied with the process to manage updates, and how are we managing features or feedback after new features are rolled out?
Yeah, we have a constant feedback loop. For example, when when we've gone live with expenses several years ago, and then when we update it, for example, when we roll out the bot, what we do is we do send out surveys and stuff, and we will check in with our users and what's working and what's not working. So that was the part that I mentioned, where we have the 4-step process, but we're constantly, fine tuning and learning. So definitely when we have something, transformative go in, we make sure that during the release process itself, we probably bring in a few sample users. Let's take expenses. As you can see, there's a theme here with me. It's my favorite example. If you're doing something, transformative with expenses, we will identify a few key users, and we will just kind of show them what we're going live with, and then post the feature going live, we might do a broader survey to see how well it's been received, what's worked well, what's not worked well. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
I think you covered it, Kritika. Yeah, I think.
Perfect. Well, that's all the time for questions that we have. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. So after this webinar, the replay will be available on Oracle Video Hub within 48 hours. You'll receive a follow-up email after this with some additional resources and directions for how to access the video replay. If you have any questions, maybe that you feel like didn't get answered, you can always reach out to Oracle at oracle-contact_ww@oracle.com, and we will connect you with the right folks to get your questions answered or to schedule a meeting with an Oracle expert. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.